Welcome to another episode of Some Random Thoughts. I am your host, Ryan Mulkowsky. On this episode, I have with me my special guest, Mandy Capehart. Mandy is an author, speaker, and certified grief and life coach in the Pacific Northwest. She is the founder of the Restorative Grief Project, an online community of grievers and grief supporters looking for movement while they heal. Her own experience with grief left her searching for resources while offering empathetic, long-term support without minimizing the pain of the moment. When she found nothing, she created it for herself and for you. Her first book is titled Restorative Grief: Embracing Our Losses Without Losing Ourselves, released in 2021. This is a memoir and 31-day guidebook for managing grief and growth in the aftermath of loss, no matter how long it lasts. You can hear more about her grief work on her podcast, Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. She also co-hosts the Uncomfortable Grace podcast, where space is held for growth amid the messy middle parts of life. Mandy is a storyteller through and through, always in pursuit of adventure, grace, and opportunities to express gratitude. No matter the medium, her work revolves around learning how to honor our process of becoming. She currently lives in Southern Oregon with her husband, her daughter, border collie, rescue pup, and way too many houseplants. Together, we discuss grief and loss. We explore Mandy's background with her own losses and how she moved through those difficult, painful, messy parts of her life and into a space where she was able to find meaning, hope, and peace, and to bring those things to others who are grieving. We talk about myths, misconceptions, and problematic platitudes to avoid when providing support to grievers, and we discuss what it's like to be grief professionals. Thank you for listening, and enjoy. Mandy, welcome to Some Random Thoughts.
Oh, thank you for having me, Ryan. I'm so happy to be here with you today.
Well, I'm always happy to have a really good friend on the program, and you are no exception. What we're going to talk about today is grief and loss. I talked about this in my first season. I talked about it in my second season, and I'm talking about it now in this third season. It's probably something that I'm going to be talking about every season because grief and loss is so pervasive in all of our lives, but it's been even more so pervasive because of COVID-19, which we're still going through after 2 years, at least in the States. It's been about 2 years for everybody around the world. And it's such a hard reality to see this prolonged pandemic continue and more people be succumb to COVID-19, but that how it also affects families and it affects friends and it affects people in the community that love these people. And so pretty much everybody in the entire world, I would virtually say, has been affected by COVID-19 in some way, whether they've had the disease, somebody has died from the disease, somebody they know has died. So I think we need to continue to have these conversations. And Mandy here is a grief coach, and she does amazing work, Restorative Grief Community, which you can find on Facebook. You can also find Mandy on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook too, other places.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on most of them. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I use Facebook primarily for the Grief Project, which is a private group on there, but I'm really active on Twitter and Instagram. So
great. Well, there you go. You'll look up Mandy. Please check out her work. She does fantastic work, gives a ton of information that's extremely helpful. It's extremely applicable. And it really has helped me in my journey. And I'm a grief professional, but it doesn't mean I can't learn. And I learned so much from Mandy.
Yeah.
I've had my own losses recently. My wife has had losses, and look, we're human. So just because I have a wealth of knowledge about grief and I help others in their grief journey doesn't mean that I'm not touched by grief either, and that I don't feel. I still do. So it's great to have other people like Mandy in my life that I can turn to for support, for guidance. But I've just learned a lot from her wisdom. So go check her out. We'll have all of her information in the show notes, so you'll be able to connect with her. But without further ado, I want to jump straight in, Mandy. For those who are listening who don't know who you are, which I suspect are very few, but for those who don't, tell us a little bit more specifically about why you are in the work that you're in,
Yeah.
because the majority of grief professionals that I know, whether they're coaches, whether they're licensed counselors, whether they are just somebody who's been touched by grief and they're just like a grief supporter, but people that do grief work, very few, if any, just choose it intentionally. I feel like the majority are just kind of like thrown into the work. It's something happened in their life that gave them this passion and this motivation to heal from their grief and then to move forward and help others. So, what is your story about how you got into grief work and becoming a grief coach?
Such a nuanced question. And I'm definitely fall into that category of like a wounded healer, right? Like you were saying, we've all experienced something that shifts us towards compassion and towards other people in this work itself. And I'm no exception there. Uh, I don't know if there's been a year in my life that I haven't lost someone that mattered to me.
Mm,
I mean, looking back, obviously there are years that I don't quite recall, but I
yeah.
could tell you stories about loss, whether it was divorce, whether it was other traumatic circumstances or death itself in my story that have really built me up to where I am today. And so when my mother passed away in 2016, it was fairly quick. She was diagnosed and was gone within 4 months.
Mm,
And that sent me on this tailspin of wrestling with the future and my addiction to certainty and my desire for security, and realizing I had none of that. I decided there was something more I had to do. And so I spent 4 years talking about grief, speaking publicly about it, having conversations, and starting that uncomfortable conversation everywhere I went. I'm not someone who really is worried about uncomfortable conversations. I
mm,
pretty much lean into them at any chance, simply because I am a strong believer that we have to. We can't
yeah.
avoid them. There's nothing valuable that comes from continually avoiding those conversations. And so what I ended up with at the end of 2019 was a big old box of trauma in my life to unpack. And it continued all the way through March of 20 when the pandemic shut down the US. And in that moment, I remember whatever I was reading, it was very formative. I saw the screen say, we're going into a quarantine for 2 weeks. And I was like, okay, so it's not 2 weeks. This is going to be generational. This is a moment that is going to mark so many people. And I am tired of living in a world that lacks grief literacy. I
Mm,
have been navigating it myself so outwardly for the last 4 years, through my faith community and just in general in the public. And nobody knows what they're doing. And 9 times out of 10, you encounter someone who causes additional unintentional harm because they say
right.
the wrong thing or they say something that's just not thought through to avoid their own discomfort. So 2020 was when I decided I'm going to do what I can. I'm going to write a book about my story, but also about the tools that I've gathered that have helped me, that have come from all these different mindfulness and faith practices that have created this really very intentional, but very customizable, if you will, format that anybody can take and pull what they want from it and chew the meat, spit out the bones of what doesn't
Mm,
serve them. Because my story is starts around the book itself starts around my faith practice and how it really failed for me and how the application of faith in community just fell apart when it
mm,
came to grief support. So um, the book is very much my own conclusions, but at the same time, with the people I would say that aren't struggling with faith as their source of grief right now, it's a pretty safe tool to then like cross out what doesn't serve you, literally like
yeah.
mark up the book, right? So all of that to say, what I found as I was writing the book was I wanted to not do market research, but just talk to my people and be like, hey, I'm testing out these things that worked for me to see if it's just me or if any of this can show up for you too. And so I had a small group of about 12 people that I was really close to that I knew were going through grief. And every one of them said, oh my gosh, what are you doing with this? And when is the book out? And how do we help you? Because it's nothing groundbreaking in my head, because I've done it for so long, but I find that there's always going to be someone who hasn't heard about grief work or grief compassion or grief literacy in a certain way. And if I can be that person for them that changes things, that moves the needle, then I'm going to do it in a heartbeat. And so that's
Mm.
really how I fell into it. I got some coaching certifications to make all of my coaching legitimate as much as you
Right.
can.
Yep.
And, constantly going through trauma aware training, because I think that's the biggest source of lack in our grief work, especially in the world of coaching, but that's
Yeah.
another conversation. So
Yeah.
that's how I got into it.
That would be a really good one, by the way, to have in the future. Yes, you're
Uh-huh.
right. There's a
Let's do
lack
it.
of trauma-informed grief care. I think it's trauma-informed care, I think in general is a new concept across
Yes.
all of psychotherapy. But yeah, trauma-informed grief care is not really a concept that exists yet in any kind of pervasive manner or any kind of significant manner. So that would be something to really talk about because really quick. So like I'm having to learn trauma-informed care. I'm going through like my Master of Social Work program. And so my goal is to do, be a licensed psychotherapist. And so I want to become more trauma-informed in my grief care. Yeah, because that does affect how you approach it. Because it seems like grief care, at least in my approach and your approach, it could be very much different, and we can talk about that. But I utilize a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy principles in grief work, and I think that's been the prevailing methodology in grief work is CBT. But as a lot of people who are familiar with mental health know, CBT is not a trauma-informed care or a methodology, even though they have recently made trauma-informed CBT, which is very new. CBT historically is not. And so you're right. I think as grief professionals, we have to acquire some more tools and some more understanding and competency about trauma-informed grief care. What does that look like to you, though? So what does it look like? Let's just talk about
Let's
it.
just have the conversation.
Let's
Ryan.
just have the
Let's
conversation. Since you brought it up, and I think it's a really great point. What would you want trauma-informed grief care to look like? What do you think is missing in current grief care that you have seen across the spectrum, and what would you like to see?
What I'd like to see.
What
Okay.
would you like to see? Yeah.
I'll give you the example that set me off the other day. I was on Instagram, which is already a very like loaded gun of a platform for grief care and for any type of intentional wellness care, because it's all very soundbite and very, how can I quickly get your attention and sell you something or get you to like me enough to follow? And this coach I had connected with, but hadn't had any conversations with, shared something that immediately caused me to unfollow. It said, "Attention grievers," which is like red flag for me. Attention grievers. I need you to know you can change your mindset and stop feeling so sad and broken about what you're feeling. You can change your
Wow.
mindset and feel hopeful. And I was like, I will burn it down. Are you kidding me? Because that's the CBT point, right? Like that's my background as well. I have a lot of other trainings and neuro-linguistic training that I'm working through to become more trauma aware. And in my realm, I don't have a master's degree in psychology. I'm not going down the road of psychotherapy. So trauma-informed care is so different for me. I'm trauma aware. I'm not going to treat somebody. I'm going to approach with that tender curiosity that says, oh girl, we just touched something. Hold on a second. We're going to hit the brakes right now. Because what happens with coaches, especially in grief care, is they want to fix, they want to set goals, they want to have an accomplishment. They're your cheerleader and they want to encourage you. And that is where all the platitudes come from. That is where all of the affirmation of silver linings comes from. But when I'm in the middle of grief and you have experienced hope in your story, you can't just tell me there's hope on the other side when I feel nothing but desolation. I need to be able to see where I'm at and observe my own life and learn how to walk through my life and my story in a way that serves me for the long term, not just for the, you know what, you're right. I totally don't need to sit here and think, let's just go get distracted and minimize my pain so I can get through the day. And that's what I see a lot of in coaching, which really just hurts my heart. I don't want to speak ill of other coaches. I just want them to continue educating themselves. Like never arrive, never think that you've gotten enough training that now you're an effective coach, right? So in my work, my restorative grief model looks at alignment or misalignment, mind, heart, body, and spirit. So when I'm working with someone, as I'm listening to them tell me their story and everything they're carrying, I'm taking notes about how's their mind? What are their thoughts like? looking at from the cognitive behavioral techniques approach as well, but saying like, oh, they're saying the words overwhelmed, they're saying confused or
Mm.
just foggy. Okay, well, how about their heart? Oh, she's talking about it feeling shattered. And I'm listening for the language they're using,
Mm.
because that language specifically around those things is going to tell me a couple of things. One, it's going to tell me what kind of modalities and what kind of eventual tools are going to serve them well, that they're going to relate to. Because if you tell me that you feel broken, I'm going to immediately, like in my spirit, say like, oh, you're not broken, you're disjointed. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you that, because the truth is you feel broken, and that's
Mm-hmm.
a valid feeling. And I don't want to step on that and say, that's crazy. I want to say, I can see why you would feel that way. What do you want? So when it comes to, same thing with the body, when I hear them say, oh, I'm fatigued all the time, or I'm really, I'm feeling like pain in my neck, or I'm having stomach issues. These are all hints that lead me back to saying like, okay, have you ever talked about anxiety? That's all the symptoms you just described. Those are manifestations. Let's talk about anxiety and see if you understand what it actually is, or if you're experiencing it. Because the idea is when we can bring all of those things back into alignment, we have a sense of restoration in our inner selves, right? In our wholeness, this concept of wholeness. And that is defined by everyone as an individual. I could easily say, well, here's what it looks like to live fully alive and to be whole. But if I said to you as a griever, what does fully alive look like? What does that look like for you? Because that's, I think in the back of our mind, that's what we're chasing. Before grief, before loss, we felt fully alive to an extent, right? However aware we
Yes.
are in our lives, we have a definition of what fully alive means to us, and grief
Right.
steals that. So my heart says, well, what does chasing that look like for you? What does that ultimate continual journey look like? And so trauma informed care allows me then to step back and say, okay, I'm also going to listen, because if you've had bodily trauma, you can be sure as hell I'm not going to lead you through constant breathing, drop into your body meditations. That would do nothing but probably heighten your anxiety. And when
Mm.
you're ready for that, I will let you ask me about that. I'll say, I have this available, but if you are addressing trauma in your body, then chasing alignment in your body is not priority one. That's a
Yeah.
that's a bigger bag. And hey, what are you doing about that? And do you want to talk about that yet? Or do you want to touch something that's a little bit easier to approach?
Wow.
So
Yeah.
that's my approach to it.
It's great. No, honestly, I think even over the years for me, I've had to acquire so many more tools, and I'm still needing to acquire more tools. One of the tools that I need to acquire more is to provide bodily interventions, because so far the majority of the tools that I present like actively in my work are cognitive in nature, emotional in nature, psychological in nature. But the body, and it's due to there's so many great people I could just list off and mention who have kind of opened my eyes about trauma informed care, and specifically learning about, bodily intervention, whether it's, learning more about polyvagal theory, about how the nervous system works, and then, the somatic, the psychosomatic experiences that we have in the mind body connection. So I'm having to learn more about those bodily interventions, but that's why, yoga, for example, becoming like a yoga practitioner has proven to be very effective for grievers. And there's actually people out there that I have found that have certifications and have done their body of research in like yoga as an intervention
Yep.
for grievers, which is just amazing. And I'm like, okay, so now I need to explore that. And I think that's the kind of posture and attitude we all need as grief professionals, is to have a posture of, okay, there's so many more tools out there that we are not trained in and we do not know of, or how to even use as a practitioner. So let's try to acquire those tools. Or if you can't acquire those tools and somebody's dealing with something where that tool could be effective, you need to refer out.
Yep.
And that's constantly what I'm doing in my work. Is I'm there to assess, support, be empathetic, be a guide, be
Yeah.
a resource, but then I know what my limitations are,
Yes.
ethically, legally.
Yep.
And so if I can't help somebody in some specific thing, then I'm going to guide them in providing referrals to somebody who can. And that's just as important as doing the work itself. And so we need more coaches and more counselors and more people to realize what their limitations are and to put the client first.
Yeah.
That could be a scary thing, especially if you're self-employed, which I've never been self-employed. I've always been employed through an organization. But if you're in self-employed, you want that person as a client because you want to make a living, and there's nothing wrong with that, but at the same time, you got to do what's right by the client. You don't want to cause more harm to the client.
Yep.
So I get the nuances of that. And
Yeah.
I've heard the horror stories of a therapist or a coach or a counselor who kept a client way longer than they should have,
Right.
and became ineffective a long time ago, but they kept them because they were a
Cash flow.
resource, a cash flow. Yeah. So
I'm actually in the middle of a yoga grief coaching certification right now.
good. That's so great.
I
Okay.
love,
You need to tell me what that is, because
I
I
will.
want to go through that too.
I will. I've always loved yoga for myself. There's something very cathartic that even in yin yoga, which is where you hold one pose for a duration of time, as opposed to the
Mm,
flow where you're moving quicker through other
mhm,
multiple asanas, the emotional release when you
mm,
allow a muscle to contract, or you have to hold something, and the mental side has to kick in, because your brain will give out before your body will in a lot of those positions. And so it is an interesting and beautiful battleground to bring yourself to, if you are in a position where that can actually serve you, that can actually be a safe thing. But you're absolutely right. Those bodily interventions are
mm.
so powerful, and we don't know how to listen to our bodies. We're not used to being intuitive
Yep.
people, and so
Yep.
it's new.
Especially me. Yep. I mean, honestly, and I mean,
Yeah.
I don't want to, it's not about me. And I don't
Right.
want to take up any more time about it. You go listen to my story. I talk about it early in my podcast in season 1, but that was part of a lot of the work I had to do, was not only go to therapy, because I never had therapy until way later than I should have, but
Mm,
then I was always told my whole life, like, don't listen to my feelings and don't listen to my
right.
body. Don't
Right.
listen to my intuition. Don't listen to my body, and don't listen to
Oh,
my feelings. And it took me years to unlearn all of those really negative, destructive narratives, and then to reclaim new narratives that have been more healing for me.
mm,
And I feel more at peace now than I ever have,
mm,
because of unlearning all those things and reclaiming new
mm.
narratives that are healthier. But you see a lot of grievers too. I can imagine you've seen a lot of grievers who are dealing with maybe destructive narratives too.
Oh,
Maybe about their
unequivocally.
grief experience and about other things. So tell me how you provide companionship and support along somebody's journey, especially when they're dealing with a lot of like negative narratives, destructive narratives, beliefs,
Yeah.
mindsets, things of that nature.
It's a good question. And I think what I hesitate on with some people that have been in coaching and professional therapeutic relationships, right? I don't want to sit around and say like, "Oh, that's bullshit. They shouldn't have said that to you, and I'm so sorry." But oftentimes I have to say that, not
Mm,
because not because I want them to think like, "Hey, I'm the better coach." It's actually a position of humility that, as coaches, and what you were saying earlier about referring out, like, we are obligated to the client's well-being first, not ours.
mm,
We got into this industry not because it's a low barrier, easy access, low cost business to start.
right, right.
Hopefully. Some people did. And you can see it in all of their marketing and all of their conversations and all of the just change your mindset.
It's true. Right.
But hopefully we got into this work because we see the value of laying our lives out in a
Yeah.
vulnerable way and saying, we can move the needle forward for you. We can actually enrich your experience here on this earth through intentional work. And that's going to take a lot of humility on our end. And so for me, when I hear those narratives, I had a client the other day, and she consistently for months now has reverted back to this narrative of, I'm just lazy. Why am I not
Mm,
able to do this thing? You told me 2 minutes a day and I don't do it. I'm just lazy. And I was like, hold on a second. What if you're not lazy? What if you
mm,
didn't know that word? What would you say? What if it was me? Would you call me lazy? And it's a simple question. It's nothing groundbreaking, but I said, I don't think you're lazy. I think maybe you're working through some trauma, and that's the safest place that you've created, in your bed in the morning. It feels like a cocoon. It's a literal warm, safe place to lay still and be protected. I don't call that lazy. I call that self-protection. What changes if we frame it that way? And in that regard, cognitive behavioral techniques are so powerful. They're so
mhm,
insightful and give us the language to say like, oh, wait a minute, that's not true of me. Because you're right. I would never say that to you. Why am I saying that to me? And I said, that's a good question. Before we can ever climb the mountain that is grief that you're attempting to chase after healing, we have to identify like, well, why haven't you put your hiking boots on? It's not because you're
Mm,
lazy. You're probably protecting yourself. You're probably really scared. It's like anger being a secondary emotion. It's
right.
protecting us from all
Yeah.
the very sensitive things that we don't want to touch because we're not equipped or not feeling like we have someone on our side to walk through those things with. Like we won't be safe on the other end. And I see that a lot too with people who are like, well, I don't want to start grieving because it's going to cost me too much. I can't
Mm,
afford the emotional downtime or truly I don't have the privilege of taking a day off. I don't have the privilege of being in a safe home where I can actually fall apart. I don't have those privileges. And so
wow.
grief work becomes this super humble position as a coach to say, I will do whatever I can if you're with me to create that space for you, whatever that looks like, even if it's a minuscule wait a minute longer in the car before you come in the house. How do we create tiny little pockets where your circumstances of life are not interfering with your ability to live your life? And that's something that I just don't think, again, it goes back to trauma informed care. It goes back to that being aware of the society and the culture that you're within as well. But I don't think
Yeah.
that the majority of coaches specifically, therapists, I'm sure, totally different horse, right? But
Yeah.
this is the coaching is a very nuanced is becoming very nuanced, and I'm here for that. I'm hoping I'm at the front of it because I've got so many people just saying dumb harmful things. That's not
Yeah.
even an I don't even want to say it like that, like it's so unkind, but just not thinking before they speak because something worked for them. But that's the platitudes. That's the same thing we tell grief supporters, like don't say they're in a better place even if you think that that helped you. That's unloving. That's unhelpful on all fronts. So I don't know. I could rant
Yeah.
now.
That
I'm
platitude, I
trailing.
think that platitude, yeah, no, you're not. I think that platitude for me has been painful because of
Mhm.
my own journey, moving from being a Christian to being an atheist. And
Mhm.
so I've had people in the past year who have said, and now a lot of times it could be unknowingly because I'm relatively I've only come out in the past year or so, so there's still people that maybe don't know, and then
Sure.
even the people that do know, it's just like this knee jerk reaction of like wanting to say something because they want to say something comforting and they think that this will be comforting, and then
Right.
it's just totally not. But I had one person, tell me that, like they were like, oh well, they're in a better place, and I'm like, well,
What, the
I don't
morgue?
believe. I'm like,
It
well,
sounds creepy there.
I was like, well, I don't believe that anymore. So that makes it
Yeah.
more hurtful because I don't think so. And I've lost
Good.
somebody that I've loved and I care for.
Yeah.
And like you said, even if someone does have that belief, having somebody in the afterlife is not as comforting as having somebody right here and right now with you, living and breathing next to you.
Right.
I mean, I'm sorry, it's just not. I mean, I know some people try to reframe it. And look, I'm not going to judge. If like you're wanting in your own journey and in your own way, if you find comfort in that belief, that's totally fine. But it's going back to your point, which is just because it's comforting for you doesn't necessarily mean it's comforting for someone else.
Yeah.
And so don't put your grief journey, don't transfer your grief journey onto somebody else
Right.
and try to
And
do
we
the
do
work
it,
for them.
sorry, we do it so inadvertently because we are uncomfortable. When we are faced
Yeah.
with grief where this is an uncertain, I can't fix this. I asked how they're doing and they were honest and now I'm scared kind of a moment.
Hmm.
We speak out of that place of trying to reconcile back to a happy place, to those
Yep.
positivity, good vibes only. Um, Side note, if I could wipe one phrase from the earth, it would actually be good vibes only. Goodbye. No one can ever say those words again in that order. Uh, Ridiculous. But where was I going? I got distracted thinking about wiping a full phrase off the planet. That would be so good.
Yeah, that was huge. No, you were talking about the uncomfortableness that we tend
Okay.
to say
Yeah.
things that are hurtful because we're not comfortable.
Yes. Okay. So that I wanted to talk about that in the context of a faith belief system, right?
Okay,
We've
there
got
we
this
go. Yeah.
idea that because we share a label
Mm,
or we carry a book around and we both like
mm,
the same translation or we've grown
mm-hmm.
up in the same denomination that we've come
Yeah.
to the same conclusions. And the reality is that it couldn't be further from the truth. I constantly am
Mm,
saying like, hey, there's no one on earth you agree completely with. And if there is, someone's lying. One of you is
yeah,
totally
that's
full
right.
of it.
Yeah.
So let's get down to brass tacks. Your story is as different from mine as DNA. We could experience the exact same loss. We could both be on the same Titanic as it's going down, and we're having different experiences and different stories on the other side. And so for me to then not show up with questions and say, I'm curious, you chose to share something very vulnerable with me. I would love to be someone to hold space for you. Are you in need of that? Or even saying, knowing our own limitations and saying, hey, you shared something really vulnerable and I want to honor you. I have to run out the door. I'm so sorry. If this is a conversation that you want to have with me, I would love to schedule time to sit with you. But being honest, whatever that looks like, rather than just saying, oh my gosh, yeah, that sucks. But you know what? It's going to get better. Have you ever read this book? I read this book and it changed everything for me. Like, grievers can't read. I don't know about you, but like, I carried a book around after my mom died just to hold it in front of my face so people wouldn't talk to me. I wasn't reading. I was just staring at it. Like, I could have had it upside down and in Japanese and I would not have known. It wouldn't have mattered.
That's
It wouldn't
very
have mattered.
common.
And
Very common.
and so like the idea that we had resources and that we try and offer scriptures and our interpretations of scriptures to comfort someone, when the reality is that just causes more questions.
Right.
The layer of faith and afterlife and all of that on someone's loss is so, it's like the bubbling of a volcano, right? There are so many questions that are never going to be answered. The big fat why question, there is no answer for that. And yet we've got coaches that are constantly saying, like, let's find the purpose in your pain. Let's help you create.
Oh man. Okay. Let's talk about that one.
Okay.
You talk about
it.
You talk about it a lot. And I was fascinated from the moment I first saw you do a kind of a discussion on this belief of let's try to find the purpose in your pain. Kind of myth or kind of misconception. I hear that all the time. I've heard that for years about finding purpose in the pain. Tell me why you think that's problematic and why it could be harmful.
Well, you could look at my life and say the purpose in my pain was to become an author and a speaker and to advocate for grievers. You could easily say that. It goes back to reframing, right?
Yeah.
Because the truth is, I've always wanted to be an author. Did I ever want to write this book? Absolutely not. This is not the topic I ever wanted to dig into. This is not the thing I wanted to be known for, moving into people's lives, unequivocally. When we are searching for purpose, when we're asking that big why question, or when we're trying to say, look retrospectively and sand the edges of what we experienced, we minimize what we've experienced. We are denying the fullness of our humanity and the fullness of the emotional upheaval that goes with it. It's where that, in my mind, it's where that word still really comes from when you're talking about grief. When someone says, oh my gosh, your mom died 6 years ago, you're still talking about that? Well, yeah, first of all, I have so many phrases, but second, when you say still, you are implying a timeline on my process, on my life, and on my inability to pull meaning from my story. Like, I don't have to have, I started 2020 with a miscarriage. After years of infertility, our year started like day 3. I was like, cool, this is the worst. So and January is also the month when my mom died and my grandfather. So Januaries are loaded for me. So I, in the middle of this pandemic starting, had a miscarriage and had 2 big anniversaries. And so much, I'm not going to go down that road, but so much. And it would be really easy to look back and say, but God in those moments, right? Or hold up, you are not taking into consideration the fact that everything I have experienced is mine to dig through. This is my box to unpack. This is not yours to label as meaningful or purposeful. I don't think there was a purpose in having a miscarriage. I don't ever think that I will be happy that I had a miscarriage. Can I look and say, well, silver linings, you didn't have a newborn through the pandemic? That's meaningless to me. I wanted a newborn through the pandemic.
There you go.
So for you to say that, oh, well, at least you didn't. Oh, don't, at least you didn't with me. I mean, you know me, I'm pretty like, I will fight you. So
yeah, that's true. No, 100%. She's right.
It's so tender. And so when you assign meaning for someone else, when you ask, are you looking for purpose? Like, I can ask that question. Are you looking for purpose in this? Are you looking for a silver lining? Because in your timing, silver linings are powerful. Those are for
Yeah.
you to decide. That is for you to pick up and say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I've come to a place where no, I would give everything back if I could have my mom again. All of it, every single thing, good thing that has come my way. I would hand it all back in a heartbeat. However, can I look back and say, wow, mom, look at this. Look at what I've done. You asked me to take care of myself. Look at what I've done. I'm so proud to honor her memory with all the work I've
Mm,
done. That doesn't give purpose to my pain. That doesn't create meaning where meaning needed to exist. That means that I have come to a place of acceptance, but also humility in the life that is happening around me, that I can partner with myself, that I can continue to chase alignment in my own story, and I can actually show up fully alive, because that's what it looks like to me. Fully alive to
mm,
me has always meant let's find life and bring others to it. Let's find what is vibrant and whole and beautiful and engaging and meaningful, and bring others into that. And so
yeah.
that part of me broke when my mom died, because that was the biggest loss I've ever experienced. And then to go for at that time, and then to go forward to find like, oh, I have found meaning in my own life again. I remember I like people finding wholeness. I love being a part of their journey. Okay. I didn't find meaning in my mom's loss. I remembered the call on my life and the value of who I was and what I was chasing in the first place. It just became a little different. It was more clear, I guess, or differently. I could see it from another angle, but
Right.
it didn't create purpose in my pain. And that's what pisses me off, when you have people who are in beginning stages of grief and of loss, and they encounter someone who tries to motivate them through it. It just
Mm,
makes me like, motivation is so meaningless. Do you not think I'm
yeah.
motivated to feel better? Of course I want to feel differently about this pain, but telling me just to do it, or telling me, anyway, I could go for a
No.
long time.
Yeah, I don't. That's one
I
of the
know I said a
biggest
lot.
mistakes I've seen family members or friends or people tell grievers, even the occasional professional that should know better and they don't, is when someone's in their beginning stages, it's like they want to like get them to the end stage. Like they just want them to be like
Okay.
done.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not a them thing. That's not a them
Yeah.
problem. That's a you problem because, like you
Yeah.
said, you're uncomfortable with seeing somebody in that particular state. And
Yeah.
instead of trying to companion with them and support them through that, you're just trying to get them somewhere to a destination. So that's like
Right.
that's a you thing. You're transferring your own uncomfortability onto them, which is going to just make them feel more uncomfortable, and it's going to make them
Mhm.
feel more awful about the already awful feeling they have of
Yeah.
grieving. And so I think we have to learn to be more cognizant of just letting people kind of move through that journey, because there's a lot in that journey, but it's not for you to dictate. It's for them to discover on their own, right?
Yeah.
So you
Yep.
don't elicit meaning onto somebody or somebody's situation. They have
Yeah.
to derive meaning organically in that situation.
And you can't
Um,
scripture them into it either.
you
That's what
can't.
that's the one that I see so often in churches, where we've got extrapolated meaning and interpretation from scriptures that have meant something to us. Or even if
Mm,
you leave it, I mean, Jesus at the tomb weeping over Lazarus, right? Perfect example. People bring it up all the time. Look, if Jesus cried, you can cry. First of all, why do we have to validate that I'm allowed to cry? Should be allowed to cry. Natural body response. Could be
correct.
just I have dust in my eyes. I'm allowed to cry
Yeah.
whenever I want. If
Yeah.
that's the problem that you have, if that's what you think I need reminding of, you might not know me well.
Mm,
But the way that we have taken scripture and decided that it is the salve, that this is the fix all, this is how they'll find meaning, because this is where I found meaning.
yeah.
It's just centering ourselves in the story of the griever, believing that we have answers. And if there's one thing that I have learned through this work as a coach, is I have no answers. I have a lot
Yeah.
of questions, and
Yeah.
I am super curious, and I can be as curious as possible without being judgmental. Like, I don't know about you, but the first thing I've learned in working with people is learning how to keep my face neutral when they share
Yeah.
big,
Right.
traumatic, harmful things. Because
Yeah.
when I first started, and you'll have friends that will have like, are you kidding me? Can you, like, the outrage, right? Because it's easy.
Mhm.
But that
Mhm.
tenderness, that creating a safe space, you can't be outrageous. You cannot respond in a big way and say, oh man, well, I'll tell you what, I hear you and I know how to move you through it. Coaching is so goal oriented and so outcome
Yeah.
results oriented, that when you have people that are like, well, I'm going to take all of my life coaching principles and apply them to grief, I'm like, work backwards. You have no idea how differently you have to move through
Yes.
loss. Even when you've
Right.
experienced it yourself, I have people occasionally who will come to me and say, I love the work you're doing. I've been thinking about doing it too, because my spouse died or my cousin died or my sister. And so much of me just says, you have experienced great loss. And in your interpersonal relationships, I bet it does move the needle for people because they trust you. But what you're saying is not a casual, I think I'll do this on the side while I also, continue to paint houses or
Yeah.
continue to
Right.
bake cookies in a bakery. Like you're going to have to choose to pour yourself out. You're going to have to choose humility because you're going to be wrong left and right. And your story is not it can be foundational for you, but it can't be the catalyst that moves you into this. So it's funny going back to like that phrase, the wounded healer. That is the one that
Right.
I'm always a little tentative when someone's like, oh, you do grief work? Me too. I've been doing all these things, not because I'm the expert, and I'm so
Right.
far from it.
Yep. Me too.
But I'm very careful, and I try to be very careful about not inserting my experience and my understanding and even telling my own stories to grievers, because I don't want them to be swayed by what worked for me. I want them to be moved by what resonates with them right where they're at. Like if I can say something like in my storytelling to a large group, that's different. But in a one-on-one session and in the online coaching world where we have to recognize like people who are not our clients are going to see and hear our words. How do we represent ourselves well and demonstrate that we are a safe place without feeling like we're going to force them into something they're not ready for? And I think what
Yeah.
you said about just being willing to refer people out and also recognizing our own limitations in our
Yep.
own work, that
Correct.
kills me. Like I had a client once where she said something and it triggered a thought in me of my own work. And as I paid attention to my body while she was listening, I felt my stomach like get a little nervous. And I was like, I have work to do. Okay. I hope she doesn't want to go down this road, because I will have to say, you know what? That's actually not something I'm equipped to help you with right now. And it was a comment and move on. So I made a note, but in my own life, I'm like, I'm going to go down. I'm going to chase that. I don't want my wounds and my triggers to come up and affect the people I'm trying to love
Yep.
well. And admittedly, of course they have, but that's part of being trauma aware, is being aware of your own trauma and knowing that you are doing the work on the front end. Because if you are not doing the work, you've done the work. If you are not actively doing the work, because it is
Right.
ongoing, it's very obvious to the people you're working with.
That's true. 100%.
I have a new friend
People
that
are not dumb. Yeah.
Yes. Oh
Clients
my
are
gosh.
not dumb.
They're so intuitive. They're so
Yep.
intelligent.
Yeah.
And oh my gosh. Okay. Two things I want to tell you about that, because
Yeah.
I was talking with a gal who just published a book about a year ago she's an executive coach, and her story is laden with grief. And we were talking about it for my podcast, Restorative Grief. And she told this beautiful story about coming out of this grief process, navigating this loss, and how her actual book, the work she was doing with her executive clients, somehow she was like, oh my God, I am this person. I have to do the work. And her team was like, actually, you have to do the work and write the book. Like, that's what this book is. And I was so thrilled because she had the knowledge and foresight to say, my vulnerable story is going to make all the difference.
Yeah.
I'm not just making stuff up. I'm not just doing the research and writing the book. I'm actually living this in a way that is meaningful and actually changing my life in a positive manner. And it was so phenomenal, because you're right. People are not dumb. And when we read that kind of a book, it's eons beyond the other 30 books of people saying like, let me just reword what so-and-so said, or let me just change the language or whatever.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to say on the fact of people are not dumb is, in the internet coaching world, in the online coaching world, especially on Instagram, infographics are so misleading. And if nothing else, this is just a warning to your listeners. If you're going to see something, be like, oh my gosh, I like that. That resonates with me. Be very mindful of the source, because yesterday I was stomping around the house frustrated because I saw a post that said, what's speaking? Is it your intuition or is it your ego? And I was instantly like, oh, you're pitting those against each other. Okay, that's a red flag for me, but let's dig
Yeah.
in. What did you say? And the
Yeah.
person aligned ego with the head, saying this is going to cause harm. You can't listen to it. It's probably, it's going to make your body feel. She was identifying body emotions and body feelings. And I'm like, what? Your ego is evil. Don't listen to it. I'm like, no, girl, your ego needs a friend. Your ego needs compassion. But she aligned it with head and aligned it with negativity. And intuition was aligned with heart. And I'm like, intuition's kind of a gut response, which is in the body, which is okay.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
am just going to take a step back. I'm not going to internet fight with a stranger. I'm just going to, again, remind myself to be authentic and to make sure I'm not just creating sound bites and trying to gain clients and do work that doesn't actually serve anyone but me. Rant over.
No, that's just completely weird. Like all of that sounds completely off base. That's not even like rooted in any like solid psychology or anything. Like just none of that made sense. But so I can see why you were very angry.
But
yeah, I can see why you were so angry about that. Yeah, no, you'll just see so much stuff on the internet that's just like completely wrong, and people don't list sources, and people don't have any kind of understanding of like what they say sometimes. And then you're right, it causes harm. It's like the amount of misinformation is just as pervasive as the amount of information, solid information that we do have. So it's really hard to sort through that. So you got to really be careful about what you're seeing, what you're aligning your beliefs and values with, because it can be really harmful if you're not careful.
Well, I don't think people are trying to hurt. I don't think anyone's out trying to cause harm to grievers. I don't think this person posted that thinking this is going to do damage. I think they truly believed what they were talking about. And that's not to say that my perspective on grief work and mental health is it. Like I said, I am young. I am humble enough to say I don't know what I'm talking about half the time. But I am not going to put some BS out into the world and call myself an energy healer and then draw people into that without knowing like how much damage I can do if I am not mindful and very intentional one-on-one. And I think that that's where it becomes so complex in this world of trying to show up as a healer. If we have making up these perspectives and these just kind of conglomerated ideas from our experiences of what worked for us can be a very, very slippery slope for others, because again, like it doesn't necessarily have a foundation of research behind it, or it's not been effective for anyone but me. Or this is really the marker for me. How did that work long-term for you? Okay, so you did that 3 years ago and you're saying today it works, but are you still doing it? Is it how are the emotions around that thing? Are you still easily triggered by it? Triggers are just our body and our hearts and our mind's ways of saying, I need attention. I need some more intention here. And I think we don't, I don't know. There's a lot of language in the coaching world that can be so triggering without even outside of grief, just saying like, let's just minimize what you're experiencing, manifest our perfect future, and not recognize the spiritual abuse of manifestation, because if something goes wrong, then you are to blame ultimately.
Wow.
So anyway, you're getting all the cranky side of me that I don't talk about very often, because I'm like, this is not your wheelhouse. You're not the only one in the wheelhouse here. This is not just your fields. This is a lot of people's fields, but I am very protective of grievers simply because they're so vulnerable. They're already on the precipice of heartbreak. And I am a justice-oriented, protect the innocents kind of a people. So I'm like, if ever there was a group of people, it's the grievers. Don't mess with the grievers.
Don't mess with the grievers. I think that's a great way to wrap this up. So really quick, I have with me on the podcast, Mandy Capehart, my good friend, grief coach. Thank you for all the work that you do, Mandy. Your book, Restorative Grief, is out. It's been out. It's a wonderful resource. Where can people find it? I know Amazon. Are there other retailers that are carrying the book, or anyone else?
Yeah. So you can get it on Barnes and Noble. If you're local in Southern Oregon, there's a couple bookstores. I turn my front porch into a bookstore all the time. And I got to say, thank you for saying that. I know that you read it and it means a
Yeah,
lot that you find it
absolutely.
worthy and valuable.
It is. It's a really unique book.
Mm,
It's not like your typical book. It's like you did a great job blending kind of faith, um, kind of faith with grief, with your story, with like applicable tools, bite-sized chunks to make it approachable for the griever. Um, and you were able to just put all of that together. And that's not an easy task to blend all of these different types of approaches to writing and putting that together in a book that's cohesive and makes sense and can provide valuable insight. And even though I'm no longer a faith person, I am a chaplain. And so
yeah.
I still find meaning in knowing and understanding religious and spiritual beliefs and providing emotional and spiritual support to people. And so it's still important to me to read, faith resources like that. And yours is a really solid one because it avoids those platitudes that I see in a lot of Christian
Yeah.
grief works like grief books and
Yeah.
resources. It avoids all of that and it really just gets to the heart of the issue and the real
Mm,
and the humanness of it. So that's
yeah.
why I'm happy to promote your work. And I also like that you have a very humble approach to it. What do you say? Chew the
Do the
meat, spit
meat,
out the
spit out the
bones.
bones. Find what
And I think
serves,
that's
leave
what
the
sold me
rest.
too, because that's what sold me too. Because I had a couple of friends when
Yeah.
I promoted your book. I had a couple of people DMing me were like,
What
well,
are you
I know you're
doing?
an atheist and I'm an atheist, but I am grieving and I am looking for resources. Do you think this
Mm,
is legitimately going to be a good resource? And I knew the moment I was just like so proud to promote your resource is when I tagged you in a conversation I was having with one of my good friends, who's now one of your good friends, a mutual friend.
yeah.
And you were like, hey, I am happy to just be upfront and honest. And I'm going to tell you, like, if you don't feel comfortable with it, don't read it and don't buy
Don't.
it. But if
Yeah.
you feel like you have the space and you're in a good place emotionally and to approach it, then I would be honored. And just that humility, you weren't just like, some, snake oil salesman that's just like
Buy
hawking
my book. Buy my
stuff.
book.
You know what I mean? Yeah. You were like
Yeah.
really sitting with this person, being honest and
Mhm.
spending the time and unpacking like, is this going to be a good resource for them? That's when I was like, okay, I'm happy, more than happy
Mm.
to promote this. And so go buy Mandy's book, Restorative Grief. Your community, you also have a community on Facebook. So if you
Yeah.
want to link up there, if you need some support in your grief journey, Mandy has a wonderful community, restorative grief community. You can search for that on Facebook and connect with that. But just go check out Mandy's work. Go check her out on Twitter and Instagram. And you'll be glad you did. She has some wonderful partnerships as well. Enneagram Paths was one of
Oh
them.
yeah.
You did a
Melissa.
wonderful
Oh,
partnership. Yeah, you did a wonderful partnership with her and talking about the Enneagram and grief. And I was just like, that's so fascinating because yeah, the Enneagram is something that I just am not very well versed in. And so, but I knew just enough about my
hmm.
number. And
Hmm.
every time I read something by you two, I was just like, oh man, that is so
Yeah.
me. It's so weird and
Oh.
creepy, but it was just so like delightful to be like, oh, these are real takeaways I can have. So thank you for
Yeah.
that as well.
That's a whole nother conversation because I mean, alignment, mind, body, spirit, and heart, right? Those are Enneagram.
Mhm.
Those are this is a rabbit hole. I won't go down it, but I'd been
Okay.
looking for years for the right Enneagram teacher to partner with because
Mm,
I've got background quite a bit, but I'm not certified in anything. And there
yeah.
are coaching certifications for Enneagram. I've come across so many people that I'm like, nope, that's a soundbite. No, you don't actually comprehend that shadow work, a specific type of shadow work, right? This
Mm,
looking at the underside of your number and in your story, where have things come up? Well, that's grief work. And when I met
mm,
Melissa with Enneagram Pass, she was very clear to say like, "Hey, I've been looking for a grief coach because every time I'm doing shadow work, older grief things come up or older traumas and I don't know what to do." And I was like, this is where I can come alongside you and vice versa. Because when a coaching client knows their number, even if they just have a baby amount of
yep.
information, it
Yep.
totally shifts how I can come alongside and coach them through what they're experiencing. Because if I can say like, oh, well, I'm an 8 and I'm going to take things as like my gut reaction is anger on things, it makes perfect sense that grief makes me angry, that harming someone who's grieving makes me angry because I'm protecting myself against that softer side or the it's so powerful a tool. So yeah, I love to incorporate Enneagram specifically into my grief work because it makes a difference for people. So anyway, okay.
Thank you
done
so
on
much
that
for
part.
being here,
Sorry.
Mandy.
You're
Deeply
welcome.
appreciate your time in this conversation. It's been absolutely lovely.
Absolutely. I love you, my friend. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for listening to Some Random Thoughts. You can find the podcast in audio form wherever you get your podcast and at anchor.fm/somerandomthoughts. You can find the podcast in video form on my YouTube at youtube.com/Ryan Mulkowsky. Connect with me on Twitter and Instagram at Ryan Mulkowsky and on my website at www.ryanmulkowsky.com. That's RyanMulkowsky. Programming note: this is a completely self-produced project, and the guests on this program have volunteered their time. So until next time, you have one life. Make the most of it.